Hi, I'm Hal. Welcome back to my channel. And today I want to talk about all the books that I ended up reading in June. I did end up reading 11 books in June, which is a lot. It's a lot for me. I think this is the most books I've read in a month since I started tracking that more recently. Like, obviously when I was in year 7 and reading 156 books in a year, minimum, I was reading 11 books a month, you know, in all likelihood. With my job and everything, it's the first time that I've done that, and part of the reason why is because I went on a trip for 5 days where there was some signal, there was no Wi-Fi, and all I was doing was sitting around in a beautiful house and reading. Hence also why when I've tracked how many pages I've read in a month, the graph looks like this. But yes, in terms of the stats, I've ended up reading 11 books this month. Of those, I read 6 of those books physically. I read 1 ebook and 4 audiobooks, which is a crazy distribution considering that most of the books that I read are ebooks. And then in terms of where I got these from, I owned 4 of these books. I got 2 of them from my physical library and I got 5 of them off of Libby. The first book that I finished this month was The Wolf and His King by Finn Longman, which is one of the physical library books that I read this month. This is a historical fantasy book. It is a retelling of the medieval kind of story of Bisclare, which all I knew about it going in, it was the gay medieval werewolf story, and that's all that I needed when I found out that this was a retelling of that story. All of those words right up my alley. In my little illuminated manuscript-inspired shirt, yeah, I know who I am. We are following our main character, Bisclare, who is a kind of a young man. He kind of talks of himself being afflicted by a werewolf illness. He, without controlling at various points, will turn into a werewolf, and he's very worried that he will turn into a werewolf and, you know, injure people that he cares about, or will not be able to turn back into a human. His father previously held lands within Brittany where this is set, but they kind of were lost when his father died, and then he was brought up by his mother kind of on the outskirts of the kind of kingdom. But at the beginning of the book, his cousin kind of convinced him to go to court. The previous prince, who's quite young, has now been crowned and become prince, so there's a new king. He's like, go to court, swear kind of fealty to the king, and you might be able to get your lands back, which is kind of what happens, and Bisclare also becomes a knight to the king as well. And yeah, things kind of go from there. We've got 3 perspectives in this book. So we're following, obviously, Bisclare, and his perspective is written in prose and it's written in third person, so very straightforward. We also get the king's perspective as well, and his perspective is written again in prose but in second person. And then we get little intermissions from the wolf as well when Bisclare is shifted, which are more poetry. So it looks more like that compared to the normal writing in this book almost. I think that really adds to the vibe of this book. It's very kind of fantastical and historical in that kind of way. The other thing that I think is really a vibe to this book is the fact that Bisclare is our only named character. We never get the name of the king, of anyone else who's at this court. They're always described by their role or kind of a descriptive factor around them, or their relationship to another one of the characters, which I think is really interesting because it makes it it doesn't hold it in time in a way which I think really works for the story that it's telling. It has this much more elusive fairy tale quality to it. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I obviously cannot tell you how it lines up to the original tale or anything like that, but I went in to have a good time with the gay medieval werewolf story, and I had a great time with the gay medieval werewolf story, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was Some Desperate Glory by Emily Tesh. I read this as an audiobook. This is a sci-fi book, and we're following our main character, Valkyr, or Kier, who is brought up within this human absolutist death cult almost, Basically, in the history of this world, where sci-fi stuff, there's other alien races around, and at a point in history, I think quite recently, because the people that it happened to are like the previous generation, basically, the Earth was destroyed completely. So the human population is now refugees on other planets, and some of them have moved to other planets and kind of integrated more with the alien or the Majota kind of society. Some of them are kind of still outside of it, but living on different planets. And there is also a group of survivors on what's called Gaia Station, which is like these 4 big like dreadnought ships that have come together to form a space station, where, you know, people are brought up very much in this like, we will fight and win against the Majota and like bring glory back to Earth. So yeah, we're following Kia kind of as she is kind of graduating out of like training basically and going to get her role within this society. Things kind of start falling apart when like she doesn't get the like role that she thinks that she was gonna get. She thought that she was gonna be going into kind of military things. She's one of the best in her class among the like girls, but instead is being sent off to nursery to basically like get pregnant and produce babies. And she like can accept this within the like society of the world, but as soon as she gets an excuse to like not do that, she is leaving and like going after her twin brother and falling in with one of her brother's friends and also an alien as well. And yeah, so they kind of leave the station and they go to other places and kind of things get a lot more complicated from there. I really enjoyed this. I think Kia is a really interesting character. She's not very likable, and she's doing a lot of like growth and realizing that the system that she was brought up with was wrong, and like having to deal and face with some of the prejudices that she was brought up with, but she's not happy at any point in that process. She's really struggling with it in a way that I think is really interesting. I think part of that is that she is very like solipsistic in a way. She doesn't really think a lot about everyone else in the station, even people that are close to her. She's kind of the most important person to herself, and so when that starts to change, it's really difficult for her to kind of get over that in a way. And it means that she ends this book in a very different place to where she started. I did really enjoy this story. It was a very straightforward kind of story, and then like halfway through this book we get a really big change. And I thought that it was really fun to kind of like go with the idea of some of the technology that's present in this world and just like completely just kind of like go for it and completely change the world. And then kind of look at what the like repercussions of that would be, and then once again kind of go through it again, and not to be like precious with the world or the characters in a really interesting way. I had a really good time. I've seen some like mixed thoughts about this book, especially because Kia is so unlikable, especially at the beginning, but like I think it's fun and I think that's the point. It was such a bigger exploration of like learning to be a better person than we sometimes see, alongside a pretty kick-ass sci-fi setting and story going on. Like, I also enjoyed all the sci-fi bullshit that was happening. Great time. I ended up giving this 4 stars as well. The next book that I ended up picking up was The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin. I was in a bit of a sci-fi mood this month, I cannot lie. So this is obviously a sci-fi book from Miss Ursula K. Le Guin, as one would assume. We're following kind of like there's this, I don't know if one of them's a planet and one of them's a moon, or they're 2 moons orbiting each other, or they're both kind of technically planets. I can't recite off the top of my head the difference between a planet and a moon, but basically these 2 planetary bodies that are orbiting each other, one of them is called Anaris and one of them is called Urus. And basically in the past, there was a group of kind of like revolutionary idealists on Urus who decide to leave and colonize Anaris, which was previously probably a moon, completely like desolate, and build a kind of better society on Anaris. I think it's much more like socialist is kind of a very easy description. I think it's like called like Unitarianism or something like that. I read this book earlier on this month, and I did not write down notes at the time because it's such a big story that I was having difficulty kind of describing it and also my feelings towards it. So that's kind of the setup, is you have these two kind of planetary bodies with populations living on both of them that both kind of consider the other planet like their moon, almost in a way. And at the beginning of this book, our main character Shevek travels from Anaris back to Urus because he is a scientist, he's a physicist, and he has been writing this like unifying theory of physics, but he is facing a level of censorship around his ideas and what he can publish, and so he gets this opportunity to travel to Urus. He's previously won some kind of like physicist award, so he takes it to get this opportunity to like visit Urus and hopefully have more like scientific freedom of the press kind of thing. And kind of things kind of go from there. We get both a like present day timeline of Shevek in Urus and kind of adapting to this new world, the new society that he finds there, and kind of what's going on and his position that he's kind of being molded into within this world, as well as a past timeline which explores more of Shevek's time on Anaris and how he, you know, got to this place as a physicist, how life was also like there, the people around him and things like that. I would say that this book is very much like focused on the talking about society by, you know, comparing, contrasting these two societies between Urus and Anaris. Urus is much more like capitalist, people own things like that, whereas Anaris is much more communal in a real way. And I think it's done really well. Like, this was obviously the thing that Ursula K. Le Guin was trying to explore in this book, and she does a fantastic job with it. There's such an interesting like storytelling where you're just kind of picking up bits throughout this story, and we obviously get Shevek being thrown into an entirely new society, so we're learning a lot more about Urus quite like because he's facing all of these new issues, but also we're learning about Anaris throughout kind of his life there, which they're very different kind of like places. Urus is it's wealthy, there's a lot of opulence, especially in the circles that he's being put in, whereas Anaris is very bleak. It is an effort to survive there in a way that it's not for the like higher classes in Urus who we're mostly kind of dealing with. And I think she does also a really good job about kind of discussing the like issues with both of these societies and kind of like what causes and leads to kind of these things going on. And like it's very much about the conversations that these characters are having, or the thoughts that these characters are kind of having, much more, and like the setting and the ideas that are going on much more than the story or the character work specifically. But I do think that the characters are still interesting, and I like the story as well. It was a real like, oh, this was published in 1974, and it feels like in some places we're still having these conversations and we're still having to have these thoughts because nothing has really changed. Real, oh, Ursula K. Le Guin, we're really in it now, like moment. It's so weird because this is serious in a way that, especially a lot of the other books that I read this month, is not, and I'm finding it difficult to discuss it in the same way that I do discuss the books that I had like a romp and a silly fun time. But this was really, really good. I really, really enjoyed it, and I gave it 5 stars. We're now getting into the run of books that I read whilst I was on holiday in Auchinlecht. So if you do want to see my thoughts as I'm reading them, I do have a reading log about that, but otherwise this is just like a little bit of a summary and kind of main thoughts. So the next book that I finished was Running Close to the Wind by Alexandra Rowland. This is a fantasy book which is set in the same world as A Taste of Golden Iron, where the main thing that you need to know about that is that there is an empire in this world called the Arasti Empire, and they kind of have a monopoly over the seas, because during the summer the sea serpents will breed in the seas, and that means that no ships can really pass through that area, and the Arasti Empire have some kind of magic potion, special ships, that means that they can pass through the oceans, and that has really cemented themselves as this powerful empire within this world. In this book, we're following our main character Abra. He's previously been a civil servant to the Arasti Empire. Basically, there's a break-in into the shipyards, which is a plot point that kind of happens in A Taste of Golden Iron, and following this, he accidentally ends up breaking into the already broken in shipyards and kind of stealing the secret as to how the Empire ships are able to pass through the sea serpent kind of breeding grounds. And so decides that this is great. He's going to immediately leave and hopefully get some money from this discovery that he has stolen and fulfill his kind of dreams of becoming a poet and not having to work anymore in this way. Then immediately gets kind of captured by a pirate ship that he previously used to travel with and had a big falling out with the captain of this ship who he used to have a relationship with. So it's a whole like comedy of errors type thing. Abra is really interesting because he's such a like little gremlin of a guy, but has this incredible luck that means that he keeps on like falling forwards in a way, but getting better as part of it. So yeah, he ends up bartering the information that he has regarding this secret around the ships to not be killed immediately, and getting to the like pirate cove where they hang out during the summer, they start investigating on what this secret's going on. This gets immediately more complicated when they arrive to the pirate cove situation. So basically how it works is that there's a treaty between the pirates and the Empire where the pirates are able to be pirates, they just can't attack Empire ships, and the Empire will also have a representative present at the pirate cove just to kind of keep an eye on things. He gets there with these, stolen documents that he has, and then realizes that there's a new Empire representative that's present in the pirate cove who is explicitly trying to like investigate the ship break-in, and Abra is having a bad time. Things kind of unravel and get more ridiculous from there in a real way. This entire book was really funny in a way that really worked for me and had me like laughing out loud multiple times throughout this book because of the ridiculousness of what was going on in a real way, but also I thought the humor really worked for me. There is also a little bit of a romance kind of subplot going on between Abra and Tev, who is his ex and the ship's captain. They're really cool. We get glimpses of their backstory in ways that are really interesting. They have a cool prosthetic eye, the whole kind of pirate captain shebang. And also Brother Julian, who is a new member of the pirate crew, who is a monk who has taken a vow of celibacy. For like funny reasons I need to point out. And everything just gets a little bit out of hand and ridiculous. And it's so funny. Like, it was just genuinely a really, really fun time to read. It's not all up here silliness. There is obviously ideas being put forward around empire and monopolies and, the other cultures that are within this world who have had negative effects from this empire. But also, it's also about the weird cake decorating competition that the pirates do every year. It's about trying to get blue dogs for a woman, It's both of these things. But yeah, had a great time. I gave this 5 stars, like I've given every other Alexandra Rowland book that I've read. The next book that I finished was Platform Decay by Martha Wells. This is the latest Murderbot novella, which is a sci-fi series where we're following the titular character of Murderbot, something called a sec unit, which is a lab-grown human and cybernetic amalgamation which is created to act like a security robot. They're usually governed by kind of companies, and they're not really thinking entities, except in our specific case with our Murderbot. It hacked its own governor module, which is the bit in its brain that tells it what to do. And so it now has freedom to do whatever it wants, and what it really wants to do is watch incredibly long soap operas. At the beginning of the first novella of this, it ends up falling into a kind of group of these hippy-dippy humans who actually care for it and want to improve its life circumstances, and kind of things go from there. There is an overarching kind of story in regards to Murderbot and some of the other side characters, kind of, learning more about kind of themselves and things like that, and also over time, there have been more of these sec units that have also been broken out of their Goblin modules and things like that, but also they're all like separate little stories. And in this one specifically, Murderbot has been sent to a tourist, like a big space station around the like center of a planet. On like a rescue mission, there's some people stuck in this space station who are like related to the people that Murderbot really cares about. And kind of things get a little bit more complicated from there, obviously, as these things are wont to do. I have read the entire Murderbot series as audiobooks. They're narrated by Kevin R. Free, voice of Kevin in Welcome to Night Vale, and he does such a good job with these stories. So it's always really fun to listen to them. And I did really like this one. It was kind of a good mix of, you know, the action adventure that I'm expecting to get from a Murderbot book. And this one was also a bit more focused on Murderbot's like feelings. It has a like mental health module in this book, which I thought was a great addition, and it really shows how much Murderbot has grown since the beginning of this series. I gave this 3 stars. I think one of the downsides to all of these books, especially when I'm reading them as audiobooks, is that sometimes I do just lose track of the story a little bit. I really enjoy these stories, but I'm never rating them super highly, especially with them being novellas, but I always have a good time. The next book that I picked up was The Goblin Emperor by Katherine Addison. This is a political kind of fantasy book. We're following our main character Maya, who is the youngest half-goblin son of the Emperor. They're all other than the goblins. The other race is kind of elves in this world. So like Maya has been brought up outside of like court. He is basically in a like faraway house in the like countryside with his cousin who does not really care for him. And at the beginning of this book, Maya gets the news that his father and his 3 older brothers have all been killed in an airship accident, making him the new emperor. And so he gets rushed back to kind of the capital and has to very quickly take on this role as emperor and kind of obviously like really quickly adapt to that situation going on. But also, like, there's some things around that airship accident that happened that are a little bit suspicious. And so there's also this subplot of the, like, murder mystery investigation going on as well. I really love this book, because it's so, like, gritty in a way that a lot of political fantasy books are. At the beginning of this book, we get, like, notes on, like, a glossary, we get notes on language. I really enjoyed how language was used, not only the like made up fantasy words, but we're using informal, formal first person and second person pronouns. Maya very quickly has to use we when referring to himself, and in more formal settings, we're using thou and you as a, you know, informal, formal pronoun, which makes it feel historical in this way. Maya's having to deal with obviously like all of his various advisors and his servants. There's specific roles kind of as the emperor that you have people fill in, or is dealing with, you know, like, you know, the running of an empire, which in a way that I thought was really interesting and kind of more of the nitty-gritty that I really enjoy. I really enjoyed the like description of a lot of the like fashion in this world. The emperor has to wear white, and a lot of that description is really interesting. Obviously as well, like Maya is visibly different from a lot of the other characters in this book as well. There are other half-goblin characters. It is a thing that marks him as other. There is a visit from the goblin delegation as well, which is like a whole thing. Really enjoyed this in the way of like getting stuck into a really good kind of nitty-gritty fantasy book and kind of having this more political kind of plot come together as well as movers and kind of schemers within the shadows, and we're seeing kind of how things kind of unfold. I had a really good time with this. I also gave this 5 stars as well. I'm definitely interested. I know there's more books that are kind of set in the same world, but I believe following different characters. But I am kind of interested in them, especially because I think we've met one of them and his like job is really quite interesting. The next book that I finished was A Prayer for the Crown Shy by Becky Chambers. This is the sequel to Psalm for the Wild Belt. We're in this like futuristic solar punk type world. Basically in the past, humans had created robots and we're still using, you know, fossil fuels and things like that, and there's a moment where the robots gain sentience and decide to kind of all leave the humans and go off into the wilderness and not be used as tools anymore. And that's really the like impetus for humanity changing their ways, becoming more sustainable and having a more responsible attitude to nature and things like that. In the first book, we're following our main character, sibling Dex, who is a monk. They've kind of become disillusioned with their job. They decide to become a tea monk, which is someone who goes out into the community and makes tea for people and listens to their stories. And they're also like on a bit of a quest to hear cricket song. And as they're doing this, they end up running into Moscap, who is a robot who has been sent out by the robots to kind of find out how the humans are doing and if they need anything. And so in this book, we're kind of following on directly from where we left off in the first book. Moscap and Dex are kind of coming back into society, and obviously kind of a lot of people are very excited to meet this robot. This is the first time that a lot of the people who are now living have seen a robot, and so it's very much kind of still focusing on those ideas around society and what do people need, and also like what is purpose and what are you meant to be doing with your life in a real way. This was fun. This is also a fun little kind of read to be reading whilst out in nature. I really like these characters. I really like how they compare and contrast to each other in some like really interesting ways. We get Moscap as a robot, who is very much more like scatterbrained and excitable, and Dex is in this more like calm and like organized kind of role, which I think is a really good contrast to the fact that they're human and robot kind of thing. So yeah, I ended up giving this like 4 stars like the first book. I think really it was a time and place kind of thing. I think this was really fun and it really worked for me in where I was, which was I was listening to this whilst going on walks in the middle of nature, kind of in the middle of the countryside. It was lovely. The next book that I picked up was Apparently Sir Cameron Needs to Die by Greer Stothers. This is a mostly fantasy book. We're following our main character, Sir Cameron, who is this kind of hot, blonde, cowardly knight. He isn't liked by the majority of people around this and doesn't really understand it, but has kind of gotten himself into the situation where he's also like surface level accepted by the other knights in this weird way. He goes on a walk with one of his friends, an elf called Glenda, and as part of this realizes that he's actually being taken to his death because of the prophecy that Sir Cameron needs to die to stop the evil sorcerer from destroying the world. Dead evil sorcerer Marullo basically like 40 years ago was like, hey, by the way guys, I'm gonna go kill God, so this is your warning. Basically Sir Cameron decides that the only solution to this problem is to use this information, go to the evil sorcerer and barter with this information, kind of for his life to keep himself safe. This doesn't fully work. He does get transformed into a vulture for a period of this book, but also he doesn't die. You know, it's not like Marullo instantly kills him, which is what it would happen to kind of anyone else. So we kind of get this progression of this relationship and romance between Sir Cameron and Marullo, as we also learn a bit more about kind of what's going on in this world. Kind of plot points kind of spiral from there. This is technically kind of a spoiler, but we do find things that point this way very early on in this book, is that I really enjoy a fantasy book which is got sci-fi elements, or the other way around. I really enjoy sci-fi books that got fantasy elements. So I was like on board with some of the like kookiness that's going on in this plot because of those reasons. This is another book that is kind of meant to be quite funny within its narrative style and kind of what's going on. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work for me, especially not to the same level as Running Close to the Wind, which I read like literally the same week as I started this. I could tell the humorous elements. It wasn't like the jokes weren't working for me, it just like was not as funny, if that makes sense. I thought this was fun. It is very much like this is this author's first work and it feels that way, but I had a good time. I thought that it was incredibly solid. I would definitely be interested in picking up kind of more from this author going forward. I ended up giving this 3 stars. The next book that I ended up picking up was Daughter of Crows by Mark Lawrence. So I have previously read 2 other series by Mark Lawrence, one which I really enjoyed and one which I liked the first book, and then like kind of the series went downhill for me and I did not like the third book in this series at all. So I was like, this sounds interesting, I'll pick it up, and it's kind of like, you know, my last chance. So we're following kind of, I guess, 2 main timelines. We've got our modern day timeline where we're following Rue, who is an older woman. She has settled down in a little village, she's had children and they've all left the house. She's got like her group of like 2 friends and they hang out like on a porch kind of situation. When this story starts, a bunch of mercenaries have come into town and killed Rue's friends, and Rue in her past was something that's called a kindness, which I'll get into in a second. And so she kind of starts up on this quest for revenge again. She wants to find out who organized this and get revenge and get kind of closure for her friends that have been killed. She's got a cool crow that has the soul of another person from this village that was killed on her shoulder, and she's off adventuring kind of thing. The other timeline that we get is Rue's kind of class at the Academy for Kindness, which is this weird school situation. They basically accept 100 girls every year who are sold there, normally by their families, and they are all taught how to kill and poison and become something that's called a kindness, which is kind of this ultimate like revenge machine, kind of styled after the like 3 Furies. We whittle down this class of 100 down to like 3. So similar in some ways to the Book of the Ancestors series by Mark Lawrence, which is the one that I enjoyed, which is a school for girls to become nuns, like warrior nuns, but like with some of the violence and the like brutality kind of dialed up to 100. What I did really enjoy about the past timeline is that we don't actually know who Rue is for a significant portion of this book. We are actually end up following a couple of different girls, and Rue is using a different name when she was a young girl compared to as an old woman. So we don't actually know who she is for a while, which I thought was really interesting, and it meant that we could like do more dramatic things with the characters that we are following in a way that if like chapter 1 Rue, chapter 2 Rue in the past, we know that there's a level of safeness around Rue in the past because we know that she grows up in that way. Whereas because we don't actually know who she is, those characters aren't as safe as they would be if we knew one-to-one who it is, if that makes sense. I'm really interested into like learning more about this world. There's been a lot of changes between like our past and our present timeline, which are quite interesting and really shaped who Rue is as a person. I hope that we kind of explore that kind of in the future. Something that I think doesn't get followed up is we do get a map in the beginning of this book. I have no idea where a lot of the places that we are actually like spend this book are. Well, I do know where we spend some of this book in, but like there's 2 islands. We never really get told a lot about why we're following like these 2 islands and stuff like that. So yeah, I really am interested in learning kind of more about this world, more about some of the magic system that's going on in this world, because we've not only got like the kindness, but we also get like a different kind of like almost supernatural killer kind of variation come up in this book. There are another perspective which I'm going to be very brief about, but like that was quite like, I think it's meant to be confusing, but it was a bit confusing, so I would love to get some more clarification about what's going on there. And it was fun also to like be following this book of an older woman going around kicking ass. Like that's always fun. I do think, and this is a criticism that I've given Mark Lawrence before, he struggles with writing characters at a specific age and making that seem reasonable, especially young characters. Like, I'm not sure what age these girls are meant to be when they start this school, because we also get some time before the start of this school, and I'm like, are they meant to be like, I feel like it's a common like fantasy, like a common issue with fantasy in these like more epic fantasies, where you're just like, these young characters don't read as young as you're saying that they are, and I felt like in this one specifically he's tried to circumnavigate that issue by not giving them ages, but I'm still like, where are we meant to be? This school is meant to take like 10 years. I'm really like fuzzy on some of the details there in a way that I would like to have some more information so I can better picture how old these people are meant to be in my head, if that makes sense. But yeah, I had a good time. I gave this like a 3 stars. It was very solid, very much interested in where it goes next, but didn't quite connect with this story or these characters as much as like I did with the Book of the Ancestors series kind of right away. The next book that I picked up and finished was Paladins Strength by Kingfisher. This is the kind of sequel to second book in the series, in the Saints of Steel series. The first one was Paladin's Grace, where in this like fantasy world we're following a group of paladins. Their god, the Saint of Steel, was killed or died at some point in the past, and they're a group of like holy berserkers type. So when this happened, a bunch of them kind of went berserk and killed themselves and killed a whole bunch of people. So they now live like much more quiet lives as part of the Temple of the Rat. So in this book we're following Istvan, who is another one of these paladins. He has been sent on a mission to kind of investigate more of the murder mystery plot that was introduced in book 1 in Paladin's Grace, so I cannot give you a lot of details around that. But he's travelling from like one part of the world to another part of the world, and when he's on his journey he ends up running into, with like a group of people. There's another paladin, there's a gnoll who like is looking after the mules that are dragging this like car. There's a guy in the car to give them like the idea that they're doing something that's not investigating a murder, like the murder mystery thing going on, because they're trying not to have that spread too far. They come across a woman called Clara, who is a member of the Order of Saint Ursula, and she is also trying to investigate the kidnapping of all the other members of her order, and they end up working together and they end up having to like go to the same place. And also like Istvan and Clara kind of fall in love over the course of the book. Very straightforward fantasy romance situation. I listened to this as an audiobook again. I felt like overall I had very similar feelings to this book as I had book 1. I thought that the plot was interesting. I really liked where we were going with kind of the murder mystery plot and kind of the like solution to that, and some of the characters that we meet that are involved in that plot. Some of it was, you know, appropriately touching when it was meant to be touching. It was horrific where it was meant to be horrific. I felt like the characters, like on paper, very much work for each other. They're both very like large people, and Istvan obviously has the like berserking thing going on, and again this is a slight spoiler, but Clara is a bear shifter, as are all of the kind of members of her order. So I felt like it was really fun to pair these two characters together who have both felt ostracized from society for both their size and their ability to be incredibly dangerous in a very specific way. The kind of downsides is, like in book 1, I felt like I was really struggling with some of the language use that is used around kind of like sexual attraction in this book. Like in book 1, these characters are sexually attracted to each other very quickly, and then like over time a like friendship and relationship develops until they actually sleep with each other. But that sexual attraction is very present during the period of time when they're not sleeping with each other in a way that is kind of weird and uncomfortable. Especially because Clara spends a lot of this book stripping down naked to transform into a bear. Obviously, I can see how these characters work together. I was not personally as invested in their romance as I was in book 1. I still felt like the characters were fun. There were various funny moments in this book, and I am interested to continue this series and see kind of what the next plot point is going to be brought up, because obviously there was the plot that was the murder mystery plot has, I think, now been resolved, I hope, but interested in where we go from here. I ended up giving it 3 stars. The last book that I ended up reading this month was The Tapestry of Fate by Shannon Chakraborty. This is the sequel to The Adventures of Amina al-Shirafi, which as far as I remember. We're basically following Amina Al-Sharafi, who is like a retired like pirate captain. She's in her 40s, and she is kind of desperately trying to like settle down. She has a family, she has a young daughter, when she gets the opportunity to like do like one last great mission and kind of get the crew back together. And so she does that, and things kind of get more complicated from there, and she has leftover like threads that keep her in this world. And so in this book, she once again gets tasked with going on an adventure and finding something for some of the magical forces within this world. We are set in like medieval Indian Ocean, like the Islamic world, and a piracy within that. We end up kind of looking at, I believe, a story that's in Arabian Nights, I think, which is the story of Queen Lab. We have a weird spindle that can pull on the threads of fate, and a weird island where things are not as they seem. So yeah, this is like, it's more set in this place rather than like being like at sea, if that makes sense. We're spending a lot of time with just a couple of characters on this weird island. But to be fair, I can't remember if that was also the case in book one. It's been a couple of years since I read that. But yeah, this was really, really fun. The world is so like rich and compelling and like real. I'd forgotten some of the details from book one, and as soon as I opened this, I was like, oh yes. I remembered exactly where we were set. I remembered the like world and the details that are going on in here. And that's because Shannon Chakraborty has done so much research into the medieval like Islamic world and like piracy in that situation and things like that, and you can really tell through the story that she's written. I really enjoyed this story. The characters are all really compelling. Like I mentioned, we spend a lot of time with just a couple of characters, and so we're really digging into the relationships between Amina and like members of her crew in this specific situation, but also like we're also thinking about her relationships with like her family and things like that. The story is most of the time kind of quite straightforward prose, but there's just this moments that remind you that this is actually a story that Amina is telling to a storyteller. And I think that's done in a really well done and balanced way. When you're kind of, you know, picking a thing to write a story, it's like she's not gone with, this is really obviously oration the entire time, but it's also not something where the idea is that it's an oration, but like you never actually get evidence of that throughout the text, if that makes sense. And we are sometimes getting little excerpts of like stories, or like we get another little perspective in here that's also adding to the story as well, which I think is done really, really well. So yeah, I had such a good time with this. I didn't realize how much I had really enjoyed the first book in this series and how much it had touched me until I was like back in this world, and I like was having all of these feelings around these characters again. This was really, really fun. I ended up giving this 4 stars as well. In terms of kind of coming up, I am currently reading The End and Other Beginnings, which is a short story collection by Veronica Roth, and as well as Morsel Follies by Alexis Hall. I've got some other books kind of lined up for the rest of the month. I hope that you have had some good reads this month. I hope that you've had a good month as well. Bye!